From raw material purchases by Berkshire subsidiaries, are you seeing signs of inflation beginning to increase?
We're seeing very substantial inflation. It's very interesting. I mean, we're raising prices. People are raising prices to us, and it's being accepted. I mean, it's not take home building. I mean, the cost of we've got 9 home builders, and in addition to our manufactured housing thing, and then operation, which is the largest in the country. So we really do a lot of housing. The costs are just up. It's an economy, really, it's red hot. I mean, and we weren't expecting it.
You might have noticed that there is a lot of discussion around inflation these days. Investors are freaking out. This can adversely impact you too, unless it already has. In this video, I'll explain why people are concerned about inflation all of a sudden, how it can impact you, and what you can do to protect yourself. Stick around to find out. Inflation is back. The last time people were seriously worried about inflation in the US was in 1970s and early 80s. Inflation is this steady increase in the price of goods and services over time. It makes everything more expensive. For instance, half a gallon of milk in 1920, almost exactly 100 years ago, was 33 cents. Now it's $3, approximately 10 times higher. That is not because milk is more scarce or expensive to produce. On the contrary, milk prices fell. 33 cents then is worth $4.25 now. So the value of dollar fell by about 13 times, but the price of milk fell even faster than that over the last 100 years. Inflation happens either because demand has increased or supply has decreased, or both supply and demand increased, but demand increased more than the supply. Figures published on May 12th showed that America's Consumer Price Index rose at an annualized rate of 4.2% in April, a rate not seen since 2008. 13 years ago. Everyone was expecting an inflation of only 3.6%. The S&P 500 fell by 2% that day. Prices of many items have increased. Surging lumber prices that have tripled over the past 12 months have increased the price of an average new single-family home by $36,000 almost, according to new analysis by National Association of Home Builders. Random length lumber futures trading on Chicago Mercantile Exchange hit a record high of $1,670 on May 7th, from $600 on 31st December 2020. After bottoming out at $460 last year, US benchmark hot-rolled coiled steel prices are now sitting at around $1,500 a ton, a record high that is nearly triple the 20-year average. Groceries are also more expensive. Have a look at this.
No, it's not your imagination or a case of buying too much food. Grocery prices are on the rise again in 2021 after taking a big jump last year during those pandemic shortages. Feeling hungry? Maybe it's because grocery prices jumped more than 0.5% in the month of March, according to the government's Consumer Price Index. That could mean a 6% price hike this year, after an almost 4% jump last year. Jackie Thompson first noticed rising prices last summer.
It's totally ridiculous, $15 for a steak.
Last year, basic strip steaks went up to $12 a pound, while one of the cheapest cuts of meat, chuck roast, went up to $8 a pound. The USDA says bacon averaged $4.72 a pound in April 2020. It's now $5.11. Bread averaged $2.44 a loaf last year. It's now up to $2.66. Prices keep going up even though product shortages have ended. One reason is fuel. If you've seen gas prices lately, you'll understand. Shipping those goods is more expensive. Plus, prices to make packaging are up too. In addition, meat processing plants are still dealing with worker shortages.
Even cars are more expensive because of a shortage of silicon chips. It is like toilet paper last year. Even used cars are in short supply.
We've seen a lot of distortions with automobiles not being available. I actually bought a truck a couple of weeks ago, and the car dealer, it was a big car dealership, they had no new trucks. There weren't any. Now that's partly due to the chip shortage, but all he had on his entire lot were 2 used trucks. And the price, the one I bought was used at 8,000 miles on it. The price was only $2,000 less than the sticker price of a new truck. And the fellow who sold it to me, he claimed, and I think I believe him, that he was doing me a favor because he probably could have sold that truck, thanks to shortages, for more than the manufacturer's sticker price. So a lot of distortion.
What is of greater concern is what might happen if this inflation continues. To understand that, let us see what happened to asset prices the last time inflation ran high in 1970s. As you can see in these graphs, stocks and bonds basically tread water. You invest for 10 years in stocks and in real terms you made almost nothing. T-bills and bonds have a negative return. This is causing a lot of concern in the investor community. To understand why the investors are nervous, we need to understand a bit of macroeconomics. In this diagram, the black jar is the US economy, the green stuff is the level of economic activity, and the red people are the government. So the government can both suck the life out of or blow life into an economy. That's what I tried to depict here. The government constantly monitors and adjusts the level of economy in the country. It does that by adjusting the amount of money in the economy. The government has two huge levers to adjust the amount of money in the economy: monetary policy and fiscal policy. Monetary policy is the level of interest rates. If the interest rates are low, people borrow and spend more. When you spend more, the other person's income goes up and they spend more, and the level of economic activity in the economy increases. Company revenues and profits go up, and as a result, stock prices go up. But if the interest rates go up, borrowing becomes more expensive, so people spend less. Incomes and asset prices go down and the economy cools down. This monetary policy is controlled by the Federal Reserve, the central bank. The other big lever the government has to control the economic activity is fiscal policy, which is controlled by the federal government. If the federal government wants to increase economic activity, it can either cut taxes or increase its spending. The 1,400 stimulus checks are one way for the government to spend it. It can also build infrastructure projects, which the Biden administration is also looking to do. If it wants to reduce economic activity, it can increase taxes or reduce government spending. Usually governments around the world never do that because it's very unpopular with the voters. No politician wants to take goodies away from voters unless they are forced to by the markets by making it more expensive to borrow money. So monetary policy is interest rates and is controlled by the Federal Reserve. Lower taxes, higher the economic activity. Higher taxes, lower the economic activity. Fiscal policy is government expenditure like stimulus checks and taxes. It is controlled by the White House, more or less. These two levers work independently. When the federal government is pressing on the gas, the Federal Reserve can and is supposed to press on the brakes and stop the economy from overheating and not letting inflationary pressures set in. What happens if the federal government is pressing hard on the gas and stimulating the economy with 6 trillion of government expenditure, and the Federal Reserve says it is not even thinking about raising interest rates? All this at a time when the economy is opening up after frustratingly long COVID restrictions and unleashing the pent-up demand for pretty much everything. This is what is happening now. The obvious answer is that the level of economic activity will increase a lot and very fast. What is unknown and what is worrying the investors is the prospect of inflation for a sustained period. If inflation shows signs of being more than transitory, the Federal Reserve will be forced to increase interest rates, which might cause a recession and collapse the stock market. That's because it is low interest rates that have caused the stocks and bond markets to go up so much. And this is what Larry Summers means by fiscal monetary collision. The question now is the inflation we are seeing now temporary or permanent? The answer is not very clear.
No, you've been hearing, of course, these concerns raised by Larry Summers and others about inflation and the fact that they think the Fed might let things get out of hand with the new policy stance. So my question is, can you tell us what is different this time versus previous periods like in the 60s when inflation got out of control? Why are you confident with the lags in monetary policy that the Fed can get ahead of inflation and make sure it doesn't go too far above the 2% target?
Let me talk quickly about the two reasons, two or you could say three, but really two main reasons why we think inflation will move up in the near term. The first is the base effects. The other big one I would talk about is bottlenecks. So this is what we're seeing in supply chains in various industries, and we're in close touch with all of these industries. So what do we mean by a bottleneck? A bottleneck really is a temporary blockage or restriction in the supply chain for a particular good or goods, something that slows down the process of producing goods and delivering them to the market. We think of bottlenecks as things that in their nature will be resolved as workers and businesses adapt, and we think of them as not calling for a change in monetary policy since they're temporary.
By far the biggest factor behind the acceleration relates to the base effect. Because prices fell last April because of COVID, percentage increases calculated from that low base will be very low. Consumer demand in the world's largest economy is roaring back. Stimulus checks worth up to $1,400 were doled out many Americans earlier in the year. Now a successful vaccination program is allowing them to get out and spend that money. The speed and the nature of post-lockdown bounce back seems to have caught many firms off guard, especially small businesses. Even at the best of times, extra demand for international deliverables takes a while to sail. A ship can take a few weeks to sail from China to America. The added complication in 2021 is that firms must also contend with shortages of containers in some ports. Some were stuck in wrong places during the first wave of lockdown. The cost of shipping from items from China to America is now 3 times as expensive as it was before the pandemic. Moreover, workers cannot be hired overnight. Firms are struggling to recruit enough staff to fill open positions. That may be a big reason why America added only 266,000 jobs in April, even though 1 million job additions were expected. The number of unfulfilled positions is running at an all-time high. Take the surge in demand and strained supply together and you get to high prices. The argument goes that these pressures tell you nothing about inflation to come. In order for it to stay high, such price rises will need to keep repeating, pushing up wages in turn. This is essentially the argument of Federal Reserve and Jeremy Powell. But there is a strong case to be made that the inflation is likely to be permanent. Fiscal stimulus in the US has been extraordinarily big. Before Joe Biden became president, Congress had already spent $4 trillion fighting the crisis. Now he proposes $1.9 trillion more emergency spending, which would take the total to almost $6 trillion, which is over 45% of GDP in 2019. That's not all of it. Biden administration is yet to pass its infrastructure bill, which will stimulate the economy even more. If the fiscal stimulus is causing the economy to overheat and raise inflation, it can be countered with a hawkish monetary policy, sometimes without even causing any recession. But this time, the Federal Reserve is unusually dovish. It has employed a new monetary policy framework and has vowed to tolerate a period of above target price rises so that the economy can get back on its feet. Jeremy Powell, its chairman, has said it is not even thinking about raising interest rates. A reopening economy, when combined with a generous fiscal stimulus, a Federal Reserve that is very tolerant of inflation, has put the US economy in uncharted waters. This is making a lot of people nervous.
When are you going to start to get worried about inflation and the consequences?
We have a model of inflation at Double I that's quite helpful for a few months forward. It goes off of a couple of variables. It's been quite accurate. We knew that inflation was going to go above 3.5, but we thought it was going to be in a month or two. And so the fact that it's already leapt up to 4.2, I believe in our model that it's probably going to go higher in the next couple of months. The peak might be in July. If we keep going higher from there, then I think people are going to be seriously worried.
If the inflation is higher than expected even in October, November and December this year, then it means it is a more permanent increase in inflation. But if inflation is back to 1 or 1.5% by then it's transitory and the Fed would have been vindicated. If the increase in inflation is more permanent and here to stay, the question then is at what levels? If it is up to 2 to 3%, which was the normal rate 10 to 15 years ago, it will be a painful adjustment, but not too much, as stock markets fall to some extent and recalibrate to new realities. If inflation increases to 6, 7 or even 8%, and that is a real possibility, then the adjustment will be very painful. Stocks, bonds and housing prices will fall significantly. Investors will have to move their investments into real assets like gold, commodity and real estate. Companies and individuals who borrowed a lot of money will struggle to repay. Our generation has always seen single-digit mortgage rates. We could have double-digit rates.
80s, under Carter, the interest rates on housing was 18%. 17%. I was in college selling real estate. So guess what happened? Nobody's buying houses because your interest rate on a house is like a credit card.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah.
And so nobody's buying houses. They're all on the sideline going, I can't buy a house with these interest rates.
Yeah.
I was on the radio by then, and I'm like, oh, you'll never see single-digit interest rates again ever in mortgages. Well, obviously, I was an idiot and didn't know what I was talking about because we've had single-digit interest rates, and now we've had for a decade, we've had 2 or 3%.
I was going to say, it's like went down to 2% last year. Yeah.
You know, you watch these interest rates. That's the other thing. You watch these interest rates go up with inflation.
Yeah.
It'll shut this housing market down.
Best businesses, during inflation, are usually the best. They're the businesses that you buy once, and then you don't have to keep making capital investments subsequently. So you do not face the problem of continuous reinvestment involving greater and greater dollars because of inflation. That's one reason real estate in general is good during inflation. If you built your own house 55 years ago like Charlie did, or bought one 55 years ago like I did, it's a one-time outlay. Whereas if you get an inflationary expansion in replacement capital without having to replace yourself. And if you got something that's useful to someone else, it tends to be priced in terms of replacement value over time. So you really get the inflationary kick. Now, if you're in a business such as the utility business or the railroad business, it just keeps eating up more and more money, and your depreciation charges are inadequate, and you're kidding yourself as to your real economic profits. So any business with heavy capital investment tends to be a poor business to be in inflation, and often it's a poor business to be in generally.
This is great advice if you are a good stock picker. Buy stocks that can increase prices and still not lose its customers. Also look for stocks that are not very capital intensive. These are, however, hard to find, even if you are a professional stock picker. So your best bet is real estate and gold. During 1970s, these two asset classes have done reasonably well. For the 8 worst years in US inflationary history, the period between 1974 and 81, REITs delivered inflation-adjusted total returns of 7% versus 0.8% for stocks. REITs, just like any company, will pass on price hikes when inflation is high. In fact, many rental agreements even peg annual rental hikes to inflation.
Are we mishandling macroeconomic policy right now in the United States?
I think this is the least responsible macroeconomic policies we've had in the last 40 years. I think we are running enormous risks.
The problem with high inflation is that it's like a genie out of a bottle. Once it is out, it is very hard to put back. The Fed would have to keep the interest rates high for a long time to kill inflation expectations, which will severely dampen the economy. The stakes are very, very high. I'll end this video on this cautionary note and will surely be watching the inflation numbers closely. Thank you for watching. If you're liking my content and if you're getting value, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. See you next time.